Welcome back to part 2 of the Consumer Trends Report by New Consumer and Coefficient Capital. In this video, we're going to continue where we left off. I think the AI conversation is over. Obviously, it's a hype point in the US right now. That hype is starting to come down to India. But that's not all that's changed in the consumer landscape. Part 2 is about weight loss drugs. Believe it or not, there's a drug in the US called Ozempic that has been blowing up.
The Ozempic, weight loss drugs like Ozempic, the hottest drug in the country right now.
Originally created to treat diabetes, it's now a hit for weight loss. Let's dive into it. Now, I'm pretty sure this stat will be mirrored in India, but more Americans would rather feel 25% healthier than earn 25% more money. I think as you get older, money is of lower value to you and health becomes of higher value. In fact, you can see in this graph that as the wealth gets higher, the need for health gets even higher. Weight remains the top health concern in America. When asked what are the top few things you care about when it comes to health, here's what the numbers look like. 32% of people were worried about their weight and 49% of those who self-identify as overweight. Quality of sleep was the second most important thing. Mental health was the third. Amount of stress, sleep, food I eat, and frequency of exercise followed suit. The cool part about doing these surveys is you can open Amazon in the US right now and you can see that the demand for products almost exactly mirrors this. The number of weight loss pills and drugs available on Amazon in the US is insane, followed by sleep drugs. Almost half of Americans have felt pressure around their body weight. And before we start shaming any other country for this, India is no better in this regard. Here are the diabetes stats for India. This is a problem across the world as we start entering a world of plenty where it's easier and easier to produce food, but it's harder and harder to control ourselves. Diabetes drugs like Ozempic and Trulicity have soared in popularity. These are GLP-1 drugs originally created for diabetes that are now being repurposed into weight loss, and they are an absolute hit. And it has already trickled its way down to India. 40% of Americans say they've heard of Ozempic. That's actually crazy for a medicine that's so new. Usually most people haven't heard of new medicines that are around the block, but 40% is a large number. You can expect it to be maybe not 40%, but pretty high among urban Indians as well, because like I said, there's a mirrored pattern between there and here. 56% of consumers who want to lose weight and are familiar with prescription drugs for weight loss say they're extremely or very interested in using one. The highest is among millennials with 73%. And those with household income above 100K, which is 72%. Many people are concerned about the long-term effects of these drugs, obviously. 52% are concerned, and they rightfully have a reason to. It's not mentioned in this report, but a lot of people who use GLP-1 drugs are having stomach paralysis. It's not a very common occurrence, but there is a slight chance of stomach paralysis, and there are lawsuits around the same topic. So we don't know what the long-term effects are because it's such a new drug, and we will learn over the years. But it turns out a lot of Americans who are overweight want the solution now. When Americans were asked, what do you think the impact of these drugs are going to be? Gen Z thought it's going to be positive, but there were a lot of people that said, hey, this is a negative effect for society. When you're older, sometimes you pick up diseases. Like a person with arthritis will always be less active than a person who is healthy. And that person will exercise less, will be more prone to obesity. But it's unlikely that you have a mild disability or a disease when you're young. Millennials were the most positive about this because most of them are entering the phase of their life where they have to take care of family, where things are breaking, where they're losing jobs, where they're not finding time to exercise, where they're not finding time to keep control of their diet. So if there's something that can help, I'm happy to take it. When it comes to health and wellness, the way Gen Z thinks and the way millennials think are two very different things. And this is important, especially if you plan to build products. You have to be very clear. Are you targeting Gen Z or are you targeting millennials? Because they want two different things. For example, for Gen Z, health and wellness is much less important than money. Like hustle culture is very popular, even in India, among young people. But as you get older, you start looking for work-life balance because it turns out that your health starts taking a hit. And it happens to almost everyone at the age of 30, where health suddenly becomes a priority. Gen Z would rather improve mental health by 25%, while millennials would rather improve physical health by 25%. And obviously, Gen Z is very skeptical of weight loss drugs and the science behind it, but the results are there. GLP-1 drugs do actually help you reduce weight. Now, it's inevitable that some of these patterns will make its way into India. And like I said, I'm here to be a student. I don't judge people on whether they take a medicine to lose weight or not. I think that the economical, social, hospital burden of being obese is very high. I think a lot of diseases today, from heart disease to inflammation to stroke, happen more often on obese people. So if there's a way for them to control it, especially if they can't control it, let's say they're disabled and there's no way for them to exercise or control their diet for whatever reason. Humans go through all sorts of shit. So if there's a tool that can help them and reduce the long-term economic burden of that, then I think it should exist and people should make their own choices. Next, let's move on to a topic that I'm super excited about and that's already made its way to India. Brands created by digital creators. Is there an advantage these brands have versus the old brands? Let's find out. So Gen Z and millennials between the ages of 12 and 42 make up 40% of the US population. In India, they make up more of the population. India's population is fairly young. And both of these groups, especially millennials, are entering their prime spending decades. Millennials like me are now in our 30s. We have some amount of discretionary spending ability and we will spend money. So where do we spend money? How do we make these decisions? It's all detailed right here. Gen Z and millennial customers think about brands very differently. In fact, the founder of a brand is very important to millennials. I thought it would be the other way around. I thought Gen Z would care more about who the founder of a brand is, but it seems like millennials are more interested. 56% of Gen Z said it is very important that a brand is founded by someone they trust or admire. With millennials, that number was 63%. With boomers, that number was 21%. They don't care about the founder, they just want the thing. Interest in creator founder brands has been phenomenal. Take a look at this graph. 44% of Gen Z said, I like creator founder brands more than any other brands. With millennials, that number was 52%. And with boomers, that number was 12%. This is also broken down. They've also stratified this by urban, suburban, and rural. Usually the rich people live in urban areas. And as you can see, this stat is most prevalent in urban areas. So if you've seen my previous videos, you know that venture capitalists divide India into India 1, India 2 and India 3 where most of the spending capacity and the financial opportunity is in India 1. The opportunity is in building for that top few percent of India. I'm sure some kind of power law like that exists in America as well. And it's very interesting to see how among Gen Z and millennials, creator-led brands are the new thing. In Instagram engagement rate analysis, creator brands destroyed celebrity brands and regular brands. Just take a look at these numbers. In food and beverage, creator brands absolutely crushed it. So if you're an Indian creator and you plan to build a brand, it seems like loyalty is very high towards food and beverage. There is a slight problem with this data. We'll come to that in the next slide. But if you look at apparel, again, big bump for creator brands. In fashion and beauty though, celebrities still win. But like I said, there's an anomaly in the data. The food and beverage brands, they are highly skewed by Mr. Beast and Logan Paul. Mr. Beast has Feastables and Logan Paul has Prime, both that are absolutely crushing it and will obviously skew the numbers pretty hard. If you remove those two outliers, creator brands in food and beverage are as good as celebrity brands. This is an interesting stat. 60% of Gen Z and millennial consumers say that if a creator they like were to start a brand in which they don't normally buy products, they probably or definitely would purchase products from the brand. 63% of Gen Z and millennials said that if a creator they like were to start a brand in a category which they already have a different favorite brand, they would probably or definitely would purchase products from the brand. So creators seem to be the new way to remove favorites, to dethrone the monopolies of the old brands and take them in new places. Take a look at this graph of an example creator brand. It is absolutely crushing retail brands and subscription service and culture wars. In fact, the brands that are heavily dependent on culture wars are doing the worst. If my understanding is correct, this means that if you're going in with a revolution or a movement, that is less important than you being a creator and being visible on social media. The challenge, however, is retention. Creator brands have the worst retention because it turns out that their products are average, if not worse than the other brands out there. Creators are not entrepreneurs or not entrepreneurs yet. They haven't been through their cycles of failure and success, which every entrepreneur goes through. So they're not yet used to the idea that you still need to build a kick-ass product for your user to buy. 81% of consumers strongly or somewhat agree that they care more about the quality of the product than whether a creator founded the brand. 70% of consumers strongly or somewhat agree that creator-founded brands only make sense if the creator has expertise in the products they're selling. Now, I don't know if you can actually say if Mr. Beast has expertise selling chocolates, but it's very clear with the entire Beast Burgers tie-up and the entire fiasco around it, where there's now a lawsuit and the quality wasn't able to be kept up by these cloud kitchens that he outsourced to, that creators will have to figure out manufacturing and quality of product by themselves. I don't think you can just do dropshipping, you have to put thought into the product. And I know lots of Indian creators who are coming up with their own brands And I'm very excited to see whether those products will end up being better than the other products that are out in the market. But I think if a smart creator partners with a smart founder, that is a very dangerous combination. So I'm excited to see how some of those play out. I am 100% sure that within the next decade, every creator that's doing reasonably well will launch some sort of product or brands. And I know a lot of people like Raj Shamani, for example, who's helping creators who don't have time to actually create the products. So I think there are very exciting business models here. And I think there will be several winners compared to the old school world where they just don't have the attention anymore. Restaurant spending has taken back the lead. During the pandemic, a lot of people ordered at home. But today in the US, according to food sales, this is not a stated preference, this is a revealed preference. How do people actually spend? More people are going to the restaurant than eating at home. During the pandemic, there was a huge boost in restaurant deliveries, and that has stayed and continued to grow. We are never going to go back to pre-pandemic era where a lot of people never ordered from a Zomato or Swiggy. Half of Americans say they order food delivery or takeout at least once a week. And restaurant delivery, however boring a business, however unprofitable it might be in India, has very strong PMF. Those who use it love it. Once you have an app of choice, either Swiggy or Zomato, and you've been using it for a while, you're not going to go away. You are going to continue to order from it. They have a very long lifetime value on you. All they have to figure out is increasing prices and increasing margins, which they're in the process of figuring out. And here's a weird parallel. 72% of Gen Z are okay with ordering from restaurants that they have never physically been to. They'll see something cool on the app, they'll order it. This is in contrast to just 11% of boomers who would almost never order from a restaurant they have never physically been to. Boomers tend to only order from restaurants that they have physically been to, that they like in person. So if you're building a cloud kitchen or a restaurant, you really need to know who your customer is, because those two customers behave very differently. Next, the report goes into skincare, especially these clinical brands. Now I'll tell you, broadly there are two categories. Tomorrow if Dettol comes out with something in skincare, that would be considered a clinical brand. If you look at Mamaearth, that's considered a regular brand, even though at some point everyone's entering each other's market. But this clinical or medical branding actually matters. The company that's known this for the longest time is Johnson & Johnson and their Band-Aids. 31% is the share of clinical brands of the US prestige skincare market in Q1 2023. And that's 11% year-over-year dollar sales growth in Q1 2023. So if you're thinking of building a skincare brand, it might be wise to think about, is there a medical angle to this? But what does it actually mean to be clinically proven? In India, one of the brands that I'm a little bit unhappy with is Patanjali. Because we actually go through a history of Patanjali, and I've done videos on this. A lot of what they say is misleading. When a brand says this is clinically proven, what exactly do they mean? When asked, most people thought that these were extensively tested in scientific clinical trials, and only 11% of people thought this product is able to legally make claims of clinical efficacy. Even within beauty, there are segments. Facial skincare is where people care most about clinically proven. Especially in vitamins and supplements that you ingest in your body, a lot of people want to see the research. In contrast, very few people looking at nail care products actually care about whether it's clinically proven. If something is branded clinically proven, then 60% of consumers say they trust them more. More importantly, most millennials say they'd pay more for clinically proven products. This is true for me as well. I once went through the liver doctor's Twitter profile and he was talking about protein supplements. And it turns out a lot of the protein supplements that call themselves clinically proven didn't run their own studies. They were borrowing on other people's studies that someone else had done, and their products were inferior. So I definitely think there will be brands in India that run their own studies on their own products and give you those results and stand behind that clinical research. And a lot of people with the money want to make sure that whatever they put in their body is safe and effective. Next, let's talk about alcohol. And this is actually a trend that's been moving from the US to India over the last few years. But a quarter of American adults 21 and above plan to drink less alcohol over the next year. This is in alignment with what we spoke about with health. People are becoming more health conscious, and even though there are studies about, 1 glass a day of wine is good for you, a lot of new research has proven that to be bunk, and no amount of alcohol is actually safe for you. And there's a nascent non-alcoholic beverage segment that is starting to take off. Almost all old alcoholic brands in the US and in India have started their zero variant, where it looks like you're drinking beer, but it's not actually beer. When the 22% of Americans above 21 were asked, why do you want to drink less? The number one reason was health, the number two reason was money, and the third reason was mental health. So the first one was physical health, the third reason was mental health. Even though if you look at boomers, a lot of them drank to keep their mental health intact. So it's very weird that Gen Z and millennials don't see it the same way as the older audiences do. 9% have said that they are more interested in THC and cannabis that have become legal in some parts of the US. In the non-alcoholic brand segment, which I'm pretty sure is going to become very popular in India as well, almost all of the brands are less than 5 years old. In fact, I couldn't recognize an old brand among this list. And weirdly, non-alcoholic substitutes cost the same amount as their alcoholic counterparts. You think that making alcohol is far more expensive than making a regular drink, but consumers are anchored to the price of alcohol, so they think, hey, this is the same thing, so I might as well pay the same amount. Next, let's move to finance and banking. As you know, consumers are really interested in finance, and the entire finfluencer wave in India is a direct copy-paste of what happened in the US, especially on TikTok and Shorts. Now, I think a lot of Indian influencers like Sharan have adapted to India nearly perfectly while still keeping the cultural context that India requires. If you don't know, Silicon Valley Bank went under the water, caused ripples not just in the US, but also in India. I was in a lot of founder groups and I could see both the founders and the VCs struggling to get their money out of SVB because a lot of Indian companies have parent companies in the US and they were banked with SVB. When consumers in the US were asked, what do you think was the cause of this? The number one thing that people said was, I think it was a lot of factors. In this case, people were a little more matured and they said, well, it was actually a variety of factors that kicked in to cause this crisis. 13% said it was the US government because the government's the easiest person to blame. And 12% said, well, the banking system sucks. Interestingly, 6% of people said venture capitalists are to blame. I really don't think it's venture capitalists' fault. I think a lot of US VCs are loud on Twitter, and whenever you're loud on social media about a topic and something goes wrong, people will point fingers at you first. Some people said that the banking crisis changed their view of tech and startups. That's very interesting. A lot of startups were banking with Silicon Valley Bank. That's what it was famous for. But why are consumers starting to get irritated with startups and tech? 25% of consumers say the banking crisis negatively impacts their view of tech companies. 21% say it positively impacts their view. 54% say it has no impacts. 20% of consumers say the banking crisis negatively impacts their view of startup companies, while 23% say it positively impacts their view and 57% say it has no impact. I don't think it's startups' fault at all. They're in the quest of figuring out a new business model, trying to make something new work, and they really don't have time to sit and think about the banking system except for the ones that are actually in fintech. Every time something comes in the news, and startups were all over the news over the last few years because unicorn. I think when you're in the news all the time, 20% of people will hate you. It's part of the game. When asked, do you have faith in the US banking system? The people who were richer said yes. The people who are poorer said no. So the rich, with all their money obviously still sitting in banks, are going to say, yes, I believe in the banking system, because if they lose faith, then they lose money as well. Most Americans trust banks with their money, but Gen Z, which paradoxically has the least amount of money, is the most concerned. When Gen Z was asked, do you believe your money is safe? 30% said no, whereas with boomers, only 8% said no. Now, inflation in the US has decelerated, while unemployment has sort of been stable. Overall, US consumer spending is trending down. That was unexpected. After the pandemic, you'd expect revenge spending. But it's actually because the economy is down, people are not making as much money. And this is going to translate to India as well, right? Like, I think the entire zero interest phenomenon has gone. We are past it. Companies are no longer offering crazy salaries. I remember when I was hiring for my last company, Scenes, we would barely be able to get an engineer. We'd even in advance give people laptops and say, we hope you'll make it here. But after 30 days, they'd just be like, hey, I got another job. It's a better job. Sorry. That is not the case today. A lot of people who got crazy inflated salaries last year are now feeling the wrath of it as companies are readjusting the salary for those roles. But internally, it's very hard for all of us to take a valuation markdown for ourselves. Even companies where founders are kind of stubborn about, no, this is my valuation, have accepted the new reality. VCs have accepted the new reality. Everyone's accepted the new reality. And I think over time, a lot of employees will also accept the new reality. And this is going to impact consumer spending. Now, I don't know whether because of price parity index and Indian products being just generally a lot cheaper to purchase, I don't know if this specific graph is going to make it to India, but it's interesting to learn what's happening in America either way. Believe it or not, consumer sentiment is still lower than pre-pandemic levels. On a scale of 0 to 10, on average, when people were asked, how happy are you? The average answer in America was 6.62. I'm very interested to do a similar happiness test in India, like a simple life satisfaction test in India, and see what the average score is. In my next video, I'm definitely going to talk about that. The highest life satisfaction scores were found among really old people. These are people even older than boomers who are done with their cycles of life. And I don't know whether they're really happy, but I think you accept life. And as you get older, your acceptance of life gets easier. So I'm assuming, I don't know if this is true, that many of them are happier because they've just accepted the state of their life. Men are slightly more satisfied than women. People living in urban areas are more satisfied than people living in suburban or rural areas. And obviously, the more money you're making, the more satisfied you are in life. And weirdly, in America, even with the entire independent me, freedom movement, all sorts of new kinds of relationships, people with 0 kids were the unhappiest. People with 2 kids were the most happy. People with 3 kids started having it tough. This is another thing about revealed versus stated preferences. Through this entire report, we saw people talk about health and all things apart from money. The good news is, compared to the pandemic, life satisfaction is increasing. And talking about remote work and office work and stuff, 79% of US consumers believe they should have a legally protected right to work from home, as long as technology and the nature of their work permit it. This is super consistent among Gen Z, millennials, boomers, everyone. Everyone believes the same thing. We should be allowed to work from home. And when asked about leaders, a lot of people believe Donald Trump would be a far better leader than Elon Musk. In fact, Elon Musk's ratings dropped by half. And it goes to show you, and I've started seeing this all over India as well, right? The more you're in news cycles, the more people hate you. I know I'm on a quest of distribution. Weirdly, it's paradoxical because I feel being under the covers, not being known is better for you because less people hate you. The more you're in people's faces, the more likely you are to say one or two things that piss off people, and the more you're hated. So I shot both part 1 and part 2 in one sitting. It was super hectic. It's been 2 hours. I do this for you guys and girls. I enjoy doing it. And if you want to keep gaining new insights on the market in different spaces, make sure you join us for the next episode of Breakdown. That's it for me. Bye.